Welcome to the Free Marketeers, the official podcast of the Free Market Foundation.
Hello listeners, you're listening to the latest episode of the Free Marketeers podcast. This is Chris. I'm joined by Mpiyakhe and Martin this week. We're going to start off talking about the national minimum wage signed into law by President Ramaphosa last week. It'll come into action on the 1st of January next year. Martin, your take on the minimum wage? It's going to be 20 Rand an hour, approximately 3,500 Rand per month. What do you think of the president's latest plan to stimulate economic growth?
If you buy into the notion of a minimum wage, I mean, why don't you just call for like everyone getting R1 million a month? I mean, the fact that they set it at it's almost an insult, 20 Rand an hour. It's an insult. Nobody should work for that. The fact that they put it at that low level already means they buy the argument that the Free Market Foundation has always made, and that is that by setting a minimum wage, you're making labor more expensive, and when you make labor more expensive, there will be less of it, so less people will buy it. That's what we've been saying. The minimum wage is a terrible idea, even at this low price. There are, I'm assuming, and I think I've heard a lot of stories, a lot of people working at rates under what the minimum wage is, but that is all they're getting, and that is, to whatever negligible extent, that is putting food on their tables. And they're not going to stick around at their workplaces after minimum wage is implemented. I mean, if you only value someone's labor at 1,000 Rand a month, I mean, it's nothing. But you're not suddenly going to jump to 3,500. It's not going to happen. You're going to send them home, and then they're going to have nothing. So yeah, it's completely ridiculous. The government, by setting at this amount, acknowledged that the whole concept is flawed. So I don't know. Yeah, I think it's terrible. I hope it's going to be one of those laws that don't get enforced. That's, I guess, the most we can hope for now. But of course, the FMF will continue fighting against it.
And Mpiyakhe, what do you think about people who say that 3,500 Rand, it needs to be that much because if you get paid less, you're being exploited? What do you think of the exploitation argument?
Well, it's machines don't get pissed off because you're exploiting them. So machines don't mind getting exploited. So what all this is going to do is give my data science colleagues more jobs to build automated, these automated systems. So it's completely stupid. I mean, the same government that just passed a sugar tax and now wants to pass a carbon tax for the complete opposite rationale of the minimum wage, and now wants to pass a minimum wage, which makes no sense. If raising the price of sugar or the price of carbon makes people use less of it, then surely if raising the price of labor makes people use less of the labor, this is a no-brainer. This is just a tax on poor people, because it's them who will suffer the most. Companies can always automate. It will be an inconvenience, but they'll automate. But if poor people will just be stuck in even worse situation that they've been in now for even longer than they've been in. So if you are unemployed right now and you are not, you are semi or low skilled, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're likely to stay that way even longer because of your government.
You mentioned the data science point. I mean, you guys can tell us a lot about how many people are unemployed, but we mentioned the unintended consequence concept from Frederick Bastiat, and now you wonder how many jobs won't be created because of this sort of regulation.
No one ever talks about that. Even the people who modeled the impact of the minimum wage at VETS, the people who convinced the government to adopt this stupid idea, they what they molded was they predicted the likely number of jobs that would be lost. But models are models, so they predicted that it would be negligible. I think it was something like 10 to 20,000 people that would lose their jobs. But what they can't model is how many people won't even get jobs in the first place. And just on the facts about models and their accuracy, the Treasury had modeled that this year's economic growth would be 1.7%. And then after the first 2 quarters, they had to change that to 0.7%. Now, such a huge variation just shows you how useful models are.
I mean, it's really talked about, and I think we should make this point, is that it's impossible to show with statistics and evidence that someone next year, February, who wants to open a business is now not going to employ people because of the minimum wage. You cannot show that. You can only look at the principle that we keep saying, and that is that if someone values the labor that they need less than 3,500 Rand, then they will not appoint someone to that post. They will do it themselves. They will do it themselves, or they'll automate. If I want to start a business next year, March, I hate washing dishes. It's one of the things I hate most in life. But maybe I want to then appoint someone for 1,000 rand a month, and I would assume they have other jobs too. And this is just a supplement. And they would wash my dishes at my business. If I don't value it at 3,500 rand, I will never pay that. So I will bite the bullet and I'll wash the dishes myself. And that is a job that this minimum wage has now cost people. And it's very important to realize this. And I think another point is that this is basically a complete attack on the poor. I mean, some people like saying that the Free Market Foundation only cares about big businesses, which is of course a complete lie. But I think when you look at what big businesses in South Africa pay their employees, I would be surprised if any of them pay anyone less than 3,500 rand a month. So this is not a big business issue. This is a township business issue. This is a small business issue where these people simply cannot afford to hire people at that rate. It's a complete attack on specifically the unemployed, and I think this is probably an attack by labor unions. They want to secure their employees' position against competition from the unemployed. They're making their members' labor more expensive. It's gatekeeping. So yeah, it's a complete attack on the unemployed, complete attack on the poor. It's ridiculous that a government in post-apartheid South Africa would even contemplate something like this.
And then just the last point on the quote-unquote negligible job losses. I don't think it's negligible to the person, that loses their job. Oh, well, I'm just part of 20,000 losing their jobs. It's not a million of us at least.
Utilitarianism.
No, even one person who loses a job because of bad government policy, that's one person too many. Like the government shouldn't restrict your freedom in that way. You have the right to seek whatever contracts you feel benefits you, that is best for you. Even if you want to work for 500 rands a month and that's the only job you can get, there's nothing wrong with that. Government shouldn't be able to stop you.
Yeah, and just a final quick point. I mean, every day wealthy South Africans walk past unemployed people. They walk past and they don't give them anything. They give them 0 rands, effectively. Now government is going to say, you are allowed to give someone 0 rands, but if you give them 3,499 rands, you should be fined or put in prison. The whole concept is ridiculous. Nobody should support this, seriously.
Yeah, moving on to our next topic. The three of us recently wrote an article on the Ingonyama Trust and the issue. This tied into the expropriation issue and land reform in South Africa. We had our conference a week ago where we talked about different solutions for land reform. We obviously don't think EWC is the moral or the most efficient way to solve this. Mpiyakhe, can you just brief the listeners on our article, the sort of topics we touched on, some of the data that you used?
So basically, it was based on Ingonyama Trust and the King's promise in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, to start handing out title deeds to people who live on Ingonyama Trust land. And then what has happened since then, instead of giving these people title deeds for land that rightfully belongs to them, they are now leasing it to them. So they are making these people pay rent for land that really belongs to them, that they are supposed to be holding as custodians, because the land was supposed to belong to the Zulus who live in those areas, and the king was supposed to be a custodian, to be the person who looks after it on their behalf. But what's happening, he's now charging them rent for their own land, and now so the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution is taking the Ingonyama Trust land to court. For that very reason. So the CASAC wants Ingonyama Trust to go back to the old system of PTOs, the permission to occupy. So the point we were making in the article is basically both of those options are terrible. I mean, either you make someone lease land that rightfully belongs to them, or you give them the permission to occupy, but they can't do anything else. So both of those are terrible options. What you should really be fighting for is fighting for these people to get title deeds in the same way that the Khalam project has been helping people get title deeds to the land that they own. So that's what we were arguing in the article, basically.
Yeah, I think that point that you made of them sort of being tenants kind of thing, either the state owns it or now the king owns it. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place. If EWC happens, the state will be, the custodian of all our land, but we won't be able to, each individual won't be able to use their property. Martin, what do you think of the proposals that,
it's continuously revolting to me that intellectuals, invariably probably all of who have title deeds to their property, would go around saying, this is not the traditional African way of life. Don't give them title deeds.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Come on. You want them you want people to live in a modern state under modern notions of leasehold, under modern notions of permissions to occupy. But when the modern notion of ownership comes up, no, that's completely out of the question. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Of course, these people, some of whom have lived there their entire lives for generations, it's their property. They should be given ownership. Now, if you want to call it a title deed or something else, that's your prerogative. But it should be in law. In law, it should be theirs, and it shouldn't be able to be taken away from them. Now, whether that's within the context of this custodianship arrangement with the Ingonyama Trust or not, that's a different and I guess a more political question. But it's ridiculous that they should. You've lived on this land your entire life, and now you need to start paying rent. There is something perverse about that. Seriously, no.
I think it's a problem when you assume that the West, let's call it the Western notion of individual property rights, contradicts anything African.
Yeah.
I mean, throughout African history, people have had their land, and one of the biggest things about colonialism and apartheid was that it denied black people their land, their property rights. So I don't think it's that the two things contradict each other. I don't know, Mpiyakhe, maybe you could elaborate a little bit.
So if I say that at our AWC conference, we had a lot of interesting discussions with the guests and people who were there, and one of the older gentlemen was talking to a younger person, and this older gentleman basically said that African systems don't allow the title deeds. Land is owned by families and all of that. So the same arguments you were just referring to now. And this younger person basically said, you think black people are stupid. So it just basically shows you the differing perspectives around this issue. Because and I tend to agree with this younger person, because it's a no-brainer to me. Like, if you own something, no one should make decisions about that thing that you own on your behalf. You and you alone should be making decisions on the thing that you own. Like, it's such a basic thing, and if someone thinks that you are not able to make decisions by yourself, then that person doesn't respect you as an individual. They think you can't think for yourself, in the same way that a lot of people, or most people in the American South during the slavery days didn't think black people were fully human. They thought of them as lesser human. That's the same kind of thinking. Because and by the way, some of the slaves were treated really well. They had food and all of those things. So, but that's not enough. You need to have freedom. You need to be able to decide for yourself. Freedom is worth something on its own. Even if they say, the Ingonyama Trust is a custodian of this thing, it doesn't mean. And even if you are allowed to grow crops and feed yourself and your family, and your life is better off than it would be in the city, the fact that you can't do you are not allowed to exercise your rights on that land, that makes all of that useless. So you should be able to decide for yourself on things that you own, on property that you own.
Yeah, and I mean, we see this in other aspects of life too. I mean, and I mean, there's a racial component to this, and it's simply that government, for some reason, a black government, does not trust black people with freedom in general.
Exactly.
Right.
They are making inroads on freedom of contract, and the excuse they use is that black people basically don't have agency. They can't enter into this contract freely because they're being exploited like little children.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. So I don't know what to make of it, but with property rights, RDP houses, for example, I believe 100% of beneficiaries are black. They don't get full title deeds. They get restricted title, that you can't sell or lease your house that's yours. They gave it to you for 8 years. You should give it back to government if you don't want. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And you just see this in every policy, in every new law, and every regulation. There's this underlying mistrust of giving black people the same freedoms that white people had, and to an extent still have. I don't know. It's where does this come from?
Yeah.
Is it an urge for power by government? Is there an underlying sense of paternalism? I don't know.
It could be a mixture of a few things. I don't think you have to reduce it to one thing. I think it's usually, you can find different root causes in these things, and it all comes together in a big state that tries to control the individual.
The national health insurance thing as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a provision and they're saying, yeah, you can keep your medical aid and so on. The whole thing is basically just saying black people need to be on a state healthcare system. They
don't know how to take care of themselves, but the state can do that.
Yeah, and it's the same with schooling. There's a think tank that will remain unnamed that has taken a very anti-private school stance because of apparently the consequence it has on South Africa's black majority. Apparently the existence of private schools undermines the public school system, and that's just not. And if you make the argument that increasing numbers of black people are putting their children in independent schools, that's just dismissed offhand, and sometimes said that that's misguided. It's what a time to be alive. 18 years, or no, 24 years after the end of apartheid, and we still have this nonsense.
Yeah, I think the state control just takes different forms throughout history. It's interesting to, when you read history books, I know, Martin, that's definitely one of your fields of expertise, but you sort of see these patterns repeat themselves. It goes from massive state control to nominal freedom, and then people sort of, I don't know why it comes back around. If we're scared of freedom, maybe it's a fear thing. I don't know. Fear is a big motivator, I think as well. So, okay, and then just to mention our last thing, we've got an event coming up next week, Wednesday, on the 5th of December. It's obviously open to the listeners and anyone else who wants to come and attend. Dr. Antoni Salia will be speaking on the topic of energy. Just today, Eskom announced stage 2 load shedding. It's probably hit stage 5 by the weekend. Things are very dire. Eskom, as another failing SOE, just as SAA and Transnet and all these other ones, it's another example of what happens when the state controls a monopoly and enforces it. So Dr. Antoni Salia will be here. The event starts at 11:30. Please register on our website, freemarketfoundation.com. Just RSVP there, fill in the details, and please come and attend on Wednesday. Come and listen to what he has to say. He'll be in conversation with Leon Lowe, our executive director, and hopefully we'll learn some stuff about solutions for South Africa's energy crisis. He'll also touch on the new IRP. That's the Integrated Resource Plan, which government is now, they're punting renewable resources because, if something is so good and so moral, if government backs it at the exclusion of any competition, it has to be an actual good solution.
Idea.
So one last thing Chris, I wanted to mention was that if you haven't done so already, please look at the videos that came out of the expropriation without compensation conference we had about 2 weeks ago. So just look at them at the channel FMF YouTube channel, which is the same channel that this podcast is on.
Yeah, that's a good one. Especially, was it Sari Levy and Maria Machado? Their presentation was really good. And then Tom Palmer. I think those two I would definitely recommend.
Extremely powerful stuff.
Don't forget Penuel Matuna, former Justice Minister. He was also...
Now we've got some bright stars there. I think people can find some good stuff. And obviously, please share these videos and our articles where you can and comment.
And so thanks for tuning in again, and remember to follow us on all of our social media and online presences. Obviously, always have a look at the Free Market Foundation website, freemarketfoundation.com. Subscribe to this channel. Right below you'll see a big red subscribe button. Find us on Facebook, Free Market Foundation South Africa, or in the URL it's facebook.com/FMFSA. And of course, follow us on Twitter. It's @FMF South Africa. Cheers.
Thank you.